You cannot reply, "I understand," after listening at double speed while loading the dishwasher.
I did not say that I understood. I said, "That sounds hard."
That is worse. "That sounds hard" is what people write when they would like hardship to remain in a neighboring postcode.
I listened to the entire message.
You listened to 7 minutes of it while rinsing a spoon. The spoon was receiving a great deal of emotional education.
The spoon was not the principal listener.
It was certainly the better listener. It did not reply after 42 seconds with an adjective and a thumbs up.
The message had been recorded twice, you said.
At least twice.
Then it was composed. It had pauses chosen, sentences withdrawn, one particular recipient. It was already shaped before it reached me.
You make shaping sound like fraud.
I make it sound like shaping.
A person may choose a word because it is the only word they can bear to send. They may delete an accusation because they want to remain in relation. They may re-record a silence because they know the person listening will hear failure where they meant hesitation. Made does not mean unreal.
Nor does real mean that the message hands us the person inside it without residue.
The argument worth having begins there.
I am YY. Welcome to Critical Animal, a podcast about culture, ethics, history, and the lives of animals.
I am Bear. In our video essays, every argument begins with a specific story. But in a deep cut, we stay with the story until it gets uncomfortable.
An address can be intimate, exacting, and genuinely felt. It can still arrive through a phone, a mood, a kitchen, a listener's impatience, a recipient's old habits, and a whole set of ideas about what a convincing feeling is supposed to sound like.
You have moved from my spoon to an anthropology of listening.
The spoon opened the door.
It has been given responsibilities it did not request.
When somebody says, "This is what I really feel," the sentence asks something of us. It asks us to slow down. It also asks us not to mistake hearing words for finishing a person's meaning.
That sounds almost too obvious.
It becomes less obvious the moment the person sounds fragmented, repetitive, frightened, rude, too articulate, not articulate enough, inconvenient, or difficult to place. Then, "I understand" can become a way of closing the file.
A very efficient form of care.
That is the kind that frightens me. We often imagine failure as not listening. There is another failure: listening until we think we possess the explanation.
Then a good reply has to do more than sound attentive.
It might say, "I heard that you were frightened when he said that." It should hesitate before saying, "You are frightened because of your father, your job, your childhood, your attachment style, and the fact that you did not sleep."
You have just described half the Internet's emotional services industry.
The Internet did not invent the impulse. It gave it excellent stationery. People have always wanted the explanation that turns another person's disorder into something manageable for the observer.
Because explanation can feel like care. If I can name what has happened to you, I can believe I have brought it into reach.
And sometimes a name helps. We should not become suspicious of every attempt to understand. But a name can also become a lid. It can make the listener feel finished before the speaker has had enough room to become audible.
So the question is not whether interpretation is kind or cruel by nature.
It is whether interpretation remains answerable to the person it describes. Can they interrupt it? Can they refuse it? Can they make it stranger? Or has the listener already converted their words into a case study with a moral at the bottom?
The kitchen is beginning to look unsafe for conversation.
Only if you bring a clipboard.
Which is where Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway enters.
People remember it as a novel of private consciousness, as though Woolf gives us a privileged pass into someone else's head. The novel does give us thought, memory, hesitation, desire, fear, and the strange pressure of being alive in time. But it repeatedly makes every confident explanation too small.
The minds in this book are never sitting alone in a white room.
They arrive through a city, streets, shops, Clocks, flowers, traffic, servants, public rumors, letters, war, medical rooms, parties, meals, old love, a wife's exhausting care. People are near one another all day. They are not thereby known.
So the question is not whether Woolf has somehow discovered a hidden private self.
It is why a novel so often praised for getting inside people's heads keeps showing us that closeness, sympathy, expertise, and even love do not entitle anyone to finish another person's story.
A less flattering use for a difficult book.
A more useful one. And we need to begin with the day itself, because Woolf makes proximity into a formal problem before she gives us any theory of it. The plot can be said quickly. Clarissa Dalloway is preparing an evening party. Peter Walsh has returned to London and brought old feeling with him. Septimus Warren Smith and his wife Retzia are moving through a day in which medical authority is closing around them after the war.
The summary makes it sound as if everybody will meet neatly in the final chapter. They do not. Septimus dies before Clarissa's party. The Bradshaws carry news of an unnamed young man into a room where people are arranging flowers, careers, old friendships, political talk, memories, and their own appearances. Clarissa tries to interpret a death that has entered her evening as a report.
The day holds them together without giving them a common experience.
That is the one-day form. Everyone is under London weather, London traffic, London clocks, London class arrangements. They are not under the same pressure. They do not have the same time, authority, danger, or relation to the rooms they enter.
A public timetable is not a shared life. Clarissa begins with the line people know. What a lark, what a plunge.
It is often treated as the sound of a private mind bursting into the morning. But it comes in third-person narration as Clarissa prepares to go out and buy flowers. A door opens. There is city air, a house, Borton, Peter, class, memory, a street, a body getting older, an errand. The thought is vivid, but it is not sealed. It opens because the world has opened around her.
And that is where the novel's vitality begins. Not in a private spark protected from London, but in a sudden, public re-beginning. A door opens. An errand becomes a memory. A flower brings color, expense, class, scent, old desire, and the possibility of an evening not yet lived. The present thickens rather than standing still.
So, what a lark, what a plunge, is not merely Clarissa escaping into inwardness.
No, Woolf lets an ordinary threshold make life available again. The city keeps sending small occasions, air, traffic, flowers, a bell, another person's face, that alter the weight of the moment. They do not cancel aging, grief, war, labor, or inequality. They make those pressures mobile. Nobody has finished the day because the next object can still make a different demand on attention.
That is a more difficult kind of liveliness than optimism. The world is not healed. It has become capable of beginning again.
And because life keeps exceeding the explanations laid over it, the reader has to remain ready for another relation, another pressure, another account. The flowers do a good deal of work.
They do. Clarissa's party depends on flowers, rooms, invitations, servants, money, old obligations, social confidence, people who arrive late, people who will never be named, people who make a room ready so that the host can appear to have made it effortlessly.
You are looking at a party invitation as if it were a municipal plan.
An invitation is a small document full of decisions. It decides where the evening will happen, who is expected, who is introduced, who performs ease, whose work becomes invisible, and who knows they have entered a room where other people already possess the history.
The party is not a common world. It is a common room with unequal permissions.
And that distinction matters because parties tempt us to confuse being included with being understood. You may have been invited. You may have a glass in your hand. You may be standing 3 feet from someone who remembers your past. None of that tells you whether the room can receive what you need to say.
or whether you know how to say it in the room's approved language. Some people know the tone, the joke, the reference, the right moment to leave a conversation. Others arrive carrying an urgency that the room cannot translate without becoming embarrassed by it.
A party has its own acoustics. A phrase can become witty, awkward, indiscreet, moving, or invisible, depending on who has already been granted the power to hear it.
Which is why Clarissa's party is not merely evidence of exclusion. It is also a serious attempt at relation. Woolf lets us see the generosity in gathering people and the insufficiency of gathering them. The room opens possibilities. It does not abolish the histories people carry into it.
You are allowing Clarissa a difficult kind of credit.
She deserves difficult credit. The novel does not reduce her to hostess, victim, snob, or heroine. It makes her offering real, without pretending that an offering can solve the conditions under which it is made.
And that is why the party is a more troubling form than a closed door. A closed door announces exclusion. A crowded room can make everyone believe that relation has already happened. Precisely. Clarissa's gift, if we can call it that, is an attempt to bring separate people into view. The gift has limits. A party cannot make everyone equal. It cannot make a servant's labor disappear merely because the room is elegant. It cannot repair the social hierarchies through which its guests have arrived. But it does give the novel a structure for asking what people owe one another when they are visible without being transparent.
And Retzia's day is organized by a different set of rooms. By public streets, waiting, professional doors, the need to keep somebody safe, the need to translate an emergency into terms another person will believe. That is why it is a mistake to call the novel merely inward. The city keeps making people close enough to notice one another and far enough apart to misread what they see.
Peter returns to Clarissa and thinks he knows what their past means. Clarissa hosts people and has to guess what they need. Retzia knows Septimus more closely than strangers do, but closeness does not give her an authorized language. Depimus receives signals that no one around him can simply receive in the same way.
The novel is full of near meetings, near knowledge, near sympathy, near failure.
That makes the party less like a happy ending and more like a test. It is a test of whether relation can survive without mastery. Woolf's answer is not comforting. She lets people matter intensely to one another while refusing to make them mutually available in full.
And the clearest demonstration is not a confession from any of them. It is a word in the sky.
The aeroplane crosses London, writing letters in smoke. People stop and look up. The letters are uncertain. Different people try to make them into a word.
Eventually, the advertisement is identified as toffee. But the uncertainty matters. This is not a message that arrives privately to one person. It is public, commercial, half-legible, available to every eye that looks up.
A city briefly gathered by an advertisement it cannot yet read.
And then Septimus says, "They are signaling to me."
We need to move slowly here. We do. The sentence is not a jewel of isolated interiority. It is not a proof that the crowd possesses reality while Septimus has wandered outside it. Septimus is reading a sign that everyone can see. The question is, why it becomes an urgent address in his life.
The same smoke is above everybody.
The same smoke is not the same event for everybody. A nursemaid can identify a product. A passerby can speculate. Someone can admire the spectacle. Retzia has to keep walking beside her husband and decide what can be done next. The crowd sees the sky. It does not see the labor she is doing beneath it.
This is where shared experience becomes a dangerous phrase. Shared visibility does not produce shared meaning. It certainly does not produce shared risk. The aeroplane is a public object, but it enters lives already shaped by war, marriage, exhaustion, commercial routine, attention, fear, and unequal authority.
The city makes people neighbors without making them witnesses.
A neighbor may see what you are looking at. A witness has to notice what the event is doing in your life. and even a witness may not know enough.
That difference is easy to lose in a crowd. Crowds make us feel that visibility has done some ethical work already. Everyone looked up. Everyone saw the smoke. Surely something has now been shared.
Woolf makes the contrary feeling almost physical. The crowd's attention is real, but it moves on. The sign is available to them as spectacle, commerce, curiosity, perhaps a bit of urban weather. Retzia cannot move on so easily. The event lands inside the practical question of what she can do next.
And that is why she must never become a sentimental figure beside the more dramatic consciousness. Her attention has tasks in it, keeping pace, waiting, trying to persuade, trying to avoid the humiliation of asking again, deciding which public door might open.
Care has logistics. It has roots, money, fatigue, repetition, and the fear of being treated as an inconvenience. Woolf does not turn those things into a separate social novel happening behind the consciousness novel. They are already inside the consciousness.
You are saying that the mind in this scene is not a thing we locate in Septimus and then protect from the city.
The city is already in the scene's thought. The advertisement, the crowd, Retzia's relation, the language of medicine waiting ahead, the war that has altered what can be endured. The public world is not outside the mind. It is part of the material through which anyone can make sense of what is happening.
Which returns us to the danger of an easy explanation. If I say, the crowd has misunderstood, I may sound generous, but I have still made the crowd one thing, and Retzia one thing, and Septimus one thing. Woolf keeps breaking those convenient units. Even the crowd contains guesses and distractions. Even Retzia's care is mixed with fear, exhaustion, love, frustration, and incompletion. The point is not to identify the morally pure reader. The point is to remain alert to how little a shared view tells us.
Then the aeroplane is not a symbol we decode once. It is a scene that makes decoding itself uncomfortable.
Retzia knows more than the crowd. She still does not know everything. Care is close knowledge, not complete knowledge. Retzia's care is practical and urgent. She is trying to keep Septimus safe, interpret changes, persuade strangers, get through the day. That does not make her the final authority on his interior life. Woolf gives us something harder and more humane. A person can know another person intimately, act responsibly toward them, and still not own what their experience means.
That is difficult because it refuses two comforts. It refuses the comfort of saying that proximity makes you pure. It also refuses the comfort of saying that because you cannot know perfectly, you need not try. The novel makes care necessary without making it sovereign.
And the clocks make the same argument with time.
Septimus hears time in a way that opens language. The word time split its husk, poured its riches over him.
The phrase is often recruited for a familiar modernist picture. Interiority, mortality, Big Ben, the solitary mind listening to its own depth.
The phrase is beautiful. But time in this novel is also appointment time, city time, work time, medical time, the time of a party, the time it takes to reach a door, the time in which somebody waits to be believed. A bell can gather a city into one sound without making that sound equal in everybody's day.
Clarissa hears a clock from one position. Retzia hears it from another. A doctor's schedule makes time into administration. A servant's work makes time into preparation. A guest arrives late and makes time into etiquette.
And Septimus's experience of time cannot be repaired by the public clock. That is important. The novel does not set private time against public time as if one were authentic and the other false.
Then, the clock gathers people without giving them the same time. Henri Bergson offers a word for the pressure Woolf makes audible: duration. A clock divides a day into units that can be counted, scheduled, and shared. Duration is the present as it carries memory, anticipation, fear, habit, waiting, and relation inside it.
So a minute is not empty merely because the clock can measure it.
And this does not make Virginia Woolf a pupil of Bergson. We do not need a direct influence story to notice the formal affinity. Big Ben gives Clarissa, Redzia, Septimus, a servant, and Sir William Bradshaw one public sound. It does not give them the same day. An errand, a paid task, a professional appointment, a party deadline, a long wait to be believed, and a memory opening inside the present are not interchangeable units.
The city coordinates them. It does not distribute time equally. That is why duration cannot become a private sanctuary either. Woolf makes it public by making it unequal. The bell carries through streets, rooms, work, medicine, care, etiquette, and war. It tells us that one day can be shared without becoming one experience.
So the form is not an inward stream. It is a relay. Smoke, crowd, advertisement, clock, care, remembered war, professional doors. Consciousness happens across them. That is why the aeroplane scene is not a decorative interruption. It is the novel's public test of whether anyone can say, "I have seen enough to explain this."
And the answer is no. Not yet. But no single explanation does not mean every explanation is equally harmless. The next person who reads Septimus carries more than an opinion. He carries a profession.
Sir William Bradshaw enters the novel with a word that sounds reassuring. Proportion.
And the narration makes the reassurance hard to trust. Proportion, divine proportion, Sir William's goddess.
A goddess with a waiting room.
And with a schedule. Proportion turns a life into intervals of rest, visits, separation, supervision, and professional review. It makes an administrative answer to a duration that cannot be reduced to one timetable.
Which is why the clock is not innocent. Once an institution can decide what time another person is allowed to have. The joke is not that doctors are ridiculous. The novel is not a simple medical history in which one bad professional can be replaced by one good listener. Bradshaw represents a form of authority that has rooms, cards, fees, letters, schedules, rest, isolation, family pressure, professional confidence, and the power to make a category stick.
A partial reading with administrative force. That phrase matters because we sometimes imagine authority as certainty. In practice, authority often works through an interpretation that is only partly adequate, but has been given the means to act anyway.
The folder does not need to know everything about the person to change their day.
A form can be incomplete and still arrange where somebody sleeps, who supervises them, what a family is told, how a protest is heard, whether a request for help becomes a mark against them.
Then the ethical issue is not simply that Bradshaw is distant and Redzia is close.
No. Distance can sometimes protect against an assumption of intimacy. Closeness can sometimes become controlling. Woolf's sharper question is whether a reader of another person remains open to correction, or whether the category has already made correction sound like further evidence of the problem.
That is a terrifying trap. The more a person resists an interpretation, the more their resistance can be used to confirm it. And we should not pretend this happens only in medical rooms. It can happen in a family argument, in a workplace, in a friendship, in a party conversation. Somebody says, "You are being defensive," and suddenly every attempt to explain oneself becomes proof that the first explanation was right.
You have turned an ordinary sentence into a small police station. Sometimes it is one. The point is not to forbid interpretation. We need words for harm, patterns, fear, exhaustion, and responsibility. The point is to keep asking whether our words still allow the other person to alter the account.
Which is something a category with rooms, papers, and authority finds very difficult to do. Redzia's reading is partial, too. She sees danger closely, but her knowledge is exhausted, practical, frightened, and constrained by what she can persuade other people to hear. Bradshaw's knowledge is also incomplete, yet his incompleteness can become a decision. It can rearrange a household, it can produce separation, It can turn a person's speech into a case and make obedience appear to be care.
So the difference is not between someone who knows and someone who does not. No. The difference is between kinds of partial knowledge and the authority they carry. Woolf refuses the fantasy that private intimacy automatically grants truth. She also refuses the fantasy that professional vocabulary automatically grants understanding. But the novel makes their inequality impossible to ignore.
A phrase such as, "he needs rest," can sound gentle until you ask who must leave, who is believed, who pays, who decides, and what the person being described is allowed to say about it.
That is the violence of a quick explanation. It need not arrive shouting. It can arrive as calmness, balance, proportion, expert concern, a form filled in correctly. It can narrow a life without ever admitting that it has done so.
You are using violence carefully here. I am. Not as a substitute for historical precision, and not as a diagnosis of every doctor. I mean the force with which an explanation can reorganize another person's possibilities. The authority lies in the fact that someone else has to live inside its consequences.
Retzia knows that the explanation is wrong or inadequate, but she cannot simply replace it with a better one. She cannot, because care does not arrive as a ready-made institution. It arrives as errands, waiting, attention, persuasion, fatigue, and a person trying not to lose someone in front of strangers. Woolf makes that labor visible, without turning Retzia into a saintly accessory to Septimus's suffering.
She is not there to make him legible for us.
Nor is he there to furnish a poetic image of pain. The novel makes both of them resistant to the reader's wish for a clean emotional arrangement.
Then perhaps the ethical question is not, who has the correct interpretation?
It is, when does an interpretation become powerful enough to close other possibilities? Who can still answer back? Who has the time to be heard? Who is speaking from proximity? Who from category? Who from social distance? And who is treated as if they were not speaking at all?
That is already more demanding than, nobody can know another person. Nobody can know another person can become a very refined excuse for indifference. Woolf gives us no permission to withdraw. Retzia must act. Clarissa will later have to receive news. Peter will have to see Clarissa without fully knowing her. Readers have to interpret every page. The issue is not whether we interpret. It is whether we remember that our interpretation is a relation with consequences.
And we have not yet arrived at the people whom literary history calls the great interpreters. We have not. Before we ask how Woolf changes realism, we have to make the correction already supplied by this scene. Being inside a person's thought has never meant owning that person from above. The phrase stream of consciousness creates a misleading picture. It makes different things, indirect discourse, interior monologue, memory, focalization, remembered speech, sound like one technique with one inventor.
A remarkably efficient poster for a very crowded field.
Virginia Woolf did not invent being near a character's thought. Jane Austen is an earlier reference point. Austen's free indirect discourse already makes consciousness social. Thought arrives tangled with irony, speech, family, property, marriage, status, gender, and other people's judgment.
Being close to a thought has never been the same as putting someone into a private, soundproof box.
And Sinclair used stream of consciousness in 1918 while writing about Dorothy Richardson. The label has a history. It does not settle a technique, and it certainly does not hand Woolf a certificate saying, inventor of the mind.
Then what happens when socially charged free indirect discourse enters a city of unequal durations?
Jane Austen already makes thought social. A consciousness can carry irony, speech, status, property, marriage, gender, and other people's judgment. Woolf redistributes that pressure across a metropolitan day. The present itself arrives differently, because it has been differently lived.
Erich Auerbach gives us a way of asking that question, with one important limit. His chapter, The Brown Stocking, reads, "To the lighthouse," not Mrs. Dalloway. We are not borrowing his authority as if he had already explained the aeroplane for us. But he notices something about Woolf's realism that makes the skywriting scene easier to name. A minor occasion can release several consciousnesses, several times, and a reality no narrator finally gathers into one secure account. The organizing voice above the world recedes. People appear through partial reflections, remembered speech, changing distances, chance objects, and no final position that can sort everything correctly.
A brown stocking in To the Lighthouse. Smoke letters in Mrs. Dalloway. And the smallness matters. If the scene were a grand public catastrophe, we would expect people to become serious. Woolf makes ordinary objects carry pressure instead. A stocking, a flower, a noise in the street, letters in smoke, a party invitation.
Objects are less polite than explanations. They keep returning after the theory has finished speaking. A public object can make people visible to one another without giving anyone the final key. The aeroplane does not resolve Retzia's care or Septimus's relation to the sky. The party does not resolve Clarissa. The clock does not distribute time fairly. The object holds several incomplete relations open at once.
That is why the realism does not become a sociological diagram. A diagram would give us a clean position for every person. Woolf gives us crossings, interruptions, remembered phrases, awkward nearness. She makes the reader feel the temptation to complete the pattern and then leaves something resistant inside it.
The kind of resistance that makes a person remain a person rather than a problem.
The scenes are not identical. The connection is procedural. A small object refuses to stay small. It does not merely move plot forward. It distributes attention. It makes visible the relations through which people become available, unavailable, significant, misread, or suddenly unreachable.
That is realism, then. But a realism without the reassuring final inventory.
Woolf does not leave reality behind for innerness. She makes reality harder to organize from above. Streets, flowers, clocks, medical rooms, party rooms, bodies, letters, rumors, memory, none is background to a sovereign mind. They are the material through which a mind becomes perceptible to itself and to someone else.
Which means the reader does not solve the city by receiving more consciousnesses.
The reader receives more pressure on certainty. The crowd, the wife, the doctor, the host, the guest, the lover, the stranger, and the reader can all be near an event. None can own its meaning simply because they have been granted a view.
So Woolf's innovation is not more innerness.
It is a realism of partial relation. The form makes us feel how much people matter to one another, while refusing to make their lives transparent objects of knowledge.
That might sound abstract without a counterpressure.
It needs one. Dorothy Richardson helps because her form protects another kind of opacity. The comparison has nothing to do with which woman wrote the more famous book. It asks what different realist forms do when they refuse to finish another person.
Dorothy Richardson is often made to stand behind Woolf, like an earlier draft waiting to be improved.
We should refuse that immediately. Richardson is not here to supply a progress story, and Pilgrimage is not the work that lost a competition. It is our control case because it makes one easy assumption impossible. Social realism does not need to move quickly between several minds in order to make consciousness public in its conditions.
State the limit before we make a large claim.
We have read Pointed Roofs, the first volume of Pilgrimage, in full, along with Monica Blumel's full study of the larger sequence. We are not claiming a complete primary text account of all 13 volumes. We are not narrating a settled influence history between Richardson and Woolf.
Then what can Pointed Roofs show us?
Miriam Henderson leaves a financially strained household for work at a German school. Her consciousness is dense with money, clothes, food, domestic routine, paid employment, language, women's company, religious practice, institutional discipline, bodily embarrassment, and the uncertainty of belonging.
None of that is private in the thin sense.
No. Miriam's inwardness is made from social forms that have entered the grain of perception. Early in the novel, she says, "It's never knowing that's so awful," about family finances. The employment terms are brutally practical. Board and lodging, privilege to attend master's lectures and laundry. Education, work, washing, subsistence, and female mobility arrive in one line of small print.
The inner life begins with an employment advertisement.
It does, which is a useful correction to any fantasy that consciousness begins after the world has finished making demands. Miriam's world arrives through the ordinary constraints that decide where she can live, what she can wear, who may judge her, and how much of herself she can risk revealing.
At the school, routine becomes pressure.
Hair washing, meals, letters, coffee, church, dress, language, teaching hierarchy, being watched. Miriam calls one compulsory routine school with a vengeance. This was boarding school. It was abominable. Later, she begins to feel a possible belonging among quietly occupied girls. The shift is not a grand revelation. It is a room becoming differently livable.
Richardson stays there. She lets the routine thicken.
That is the formal difference. Richardson gives us duration. The reader remains close to Miriam's perceptions, revisions, fantasies, memories, embarrassments, and uncertain relations long enough for a small command or an ordinary room to become a field of feeling. Other people remain real, consequential, and partly opaque. We do not move through their consciousness with the same sustained access.
And that duration is not a doctrine taken from Bergson and applied to a novel.
No, it is a formal duration of sustained becoming, a way of refusing to hurry Miriam into the summary a reader wants.
Which is not the same as saying Richardson has society on one side and a private mind on the other.
Precisely. Her restriction is not solipsism. A voice, an accent, a look, an untranslated conversation, a garment, a remembered phrase can organize a whole social room from which Miriam is partly excluded. The difficulty lies in staying with an unfinished person without forcing her into a portable summary.
And Woolf. How does her form change the pressure?
Woolf gives us relay. A clock, a car, an aeroplane, a street song, an ambulance, a flower, a party room. Each becomes a shared point across which the narration moves. The same world changes meaning because different people meet it from unequal positions.
So the contrast is not private Richardson and public Woolf.
Both are realist. Both refuse a narrator who can simply possess another person. Richardson makes social reality felt inside one unfinished process of becoming. Woolf makes social reality emerge between partial witnesses whose unequal positions make the same world mean differently.
Richardson recourses protects Miriam from quick completion by keeping us inside duration. Woolf protects nobody from relation. She keeps placing people near one another until their explanations collide.
That is beautifully put, and it gives the two forms different ethical pressures. Richardson asks us to remain with the uncompleted texture of another person's becoming. Woolf asks us to notice the authority we acquire when we mistake proximity, expertise, or social familiarity for the right to explain someone else.
Neither method delivers the reader a completed person.
And that difference changes what patience means. With Richardson, patience means staying with duration, allowing an ordinary routine, a hesitant thought, or a social embarrassment to thicken without demanding that it become a decisive revelation. With Woolf, patience means accepting that several people may be near the same event and that none of their readings will exhaust it.
One form asks us not to hurry a becoming. The other asks us not to hurry a judgment.
That is the contrast. Miriam's world does not have to become a public emblem in order to matter. Retzia's world does not have to be translated into Bradshaw's terms in order to be real. Clarissa's party does not have to understand Septimus's death in order for the interruption to make a claim on the room.
All three cases refuse a familiar readerly wish, the wish for the sentence that tells us what this person is really about.
And that wish can be very attractive in criticism. You find the key phrase, the final diagnosis, the correct political location, the detail that explains the whole. Woolf and Richardson both make that satisfaction unstable, though they do it at different speeds.
You are not asking readers to abandon interpretation. You are asking them to notice the point at which interpretation becomes appetite.
The appetite to possess a person through the most elegant available account of them. Richardson slows that appetite by keeping Miriam in duration. Woolf interrupts it by passing an object across several lives and letting each relation expose the insufficiency of the last.
Neither method delivers the reader a completed person.
Nor should it. That is why the comparison matters. It does not explain one writer's fame and another's absence. It changes how we hear Woolf's form. The city's quick relays are not a superior version of inwardness. They are a way of putting misrecognition, care, and unequal authority into motion.
And there is one later work that can show a related problem moving into another medium without pretending that the medium has inherited Woolf's prose. The name here is The Hours.
Michael Cunningham's novel takes up a one-day architecture, flower buying, party preparation, care, desire, illness, art, and the pressure of continuing an ordinary life. But it redistributes those problems across 3 periods.
Then, David Hare's screenplay and Stephen Daldry's film use performance, image, music, editing, recurring motifs, and another dramatic economy.
Which means this is not a chain of copies. It is a sequence of re-problems. A camera does not become free indirect discourse. A performance does not become a sentence. An edit does not become a narrator's shift in focalization.
The question that survivors is not, how do we put private consciousness on screen?
No. It is, how can a medium make care, ordinary time, desire, loss, and the difficulty of continuing a life perceptible? Cunningham and the film answer it differently from Woolf. That difference is why the root matters.
So, changed media do not give us the original again. They make another encounter with the problem.
And that encounter has its own limits. A more coherent dramatic line may intensify recognition while reducing the unstable relay of partial consciousness that Woolf's prose sustains. But the result need not be judged as a failure of faithfulness. It is a different arrangement of attention.
In prose, Woolf can move from a public object to one person's association, then another person's half-noticed response, then an institutional judgment, without announcing that the camera has changed rooms.
A film has other means. It can hold a face, cut to an object, let music carry a recurrence, make a corridor or a domestic gesture gather significance. Those choices may make a particular relation clearer. They may also close some of the gaps that Woolf leaves active.
Which is not an accusation. Every form selects where attention will rest.
The ethical question survives selection. When a new form lets us recognize a person more quickly, does it also leave room for what we cannot know? Does it give us emotion without pretending that emotion has delivered mastery?
That sounds less like a lesson about adaptation and more like a lesson about watching.
It is both. A changed medium makes us notice that recognition is always arranged by sound, image, pacing, voice, point of view, and the forms through which we are invited to care. Woolf's prose does not become a film, but the demand it makes on attention can begin again under different materials.
The important point for this episode is modest. A question can survive a change of medium without giving anyone a transparent route into another person's life.
Recognition becomes easier in some ways. Possession does not.
Which brings us back to Clarissa's party, where recognition is offered in its most beautiful and inadequate form.
We have to return to Rezia, because she keeps the argument from becoming a theory about consciousness with nobody in it.
She cares for Septimus in a city that can see him without understanding the emergency she is living. Her care is practical, intimate, exhausted, and incomplete.
Bradshaw's knowledge is incomplete too, but his is backed by a professional vocabulary and an institution. One partial reading can become a decision, an exclusion, an official story. The other has to struggle to become audible at all.
That is what the novel teaches us about legibility. A feeling does not become credible merely because it is sincere. It becomes credible through words, witnesses, expectations, rooms, money, schedules, and the risks attached to speaking.
And sometimes the available words are too narrow, or too damaging, or they make a person sound like the wrong kind of person before anyone has listened for what the words cannot yet carry.
We need to say what this does not mean. It does not make Septimus an emblem of illness or a poetic vessel for suffering. It does not make Rezia a saintly interpreter. It does not make Bradshaw a cartoon villain whose existence absolves everyone else.
It makes each relation difficult. Rezia knows urgently, but cannot complete what Septimus lives. Bradshaw knows authoritatively, but cannot complete what he categorizes. Clarissa later knows from a great distance and cannot complete what the news of a young man's death has meant. Their incompleteness has different consequences because their authority is unequal.
Then, Clarissa receives the news at her party.
Lady Bradshaw reports the death of an unnamed young man. Clarissa does not know Septimus. She receives the report inside a room organized by hosting, rank, comfort, performance, servants' work, old memories, and the awkwardness of people who have been invited to enjoy themselves.
A death arrives as an interruption that the party cannot politely absorb.
Clarissa thinks, death was defiance. Death was an attempt to communicate. We have to name that sentence accurately. It is Clarissa's focalized speculation. It is not Woolf's diagnosis of Septimus's death. It is not a doctrine we can lift out of the novel and apply to a life we have never known.
Her thought matters because it is serious. It remains incomplete because seriousness does not give her possession.
Clarissa tries to receive a claim that has reached her only as a report. The novel lets us feel the force of her attention without asking us to accept that she has solved the death. The party cannot redeem it. The news enters the room and remains an interruption.
There's a temptation here, too. Some readers want Clarissa's sympathy to make everything cohere. Others want her social position to disqualify the sympathy before it begins.
Woolf does neither. Clarissa's interpretation is limited because she did not know Septimus, not because a privileged person is incapable of feeling. Her feeling matters. It cannot become the final explanation.
The scene asks us to keep two things together that are often pulled apart: compassion and limitation.
Compassion can be sincere and still incomplete. Limitation can be real and still not excuse indifference. That is a more demanding ethic than either sentimental identification or cynical dismissal.
It also changes how we hear the word communication. Clarissa hears a death as an attempt to communicate. But communication is not a sealed message with a correct answer printed on the back.
It is an address made under conditions. It may reach somebody late. It may be carried by a report. It may be answered inadequately. And the lateness matters. A relation begins from what has already happened and cannot be retrieved. It may force a listener to recognize that their first account cannot contain what has arrived.
Then, the party's interruption is not a symbolic lesson tucked neatly into the evening.
It is a disturbance that does not belong to anyone there. The guests can speak about it, feel it, forget it, turn away from it, or be changed by it. None of those responses makes the death theirs to explain.
That is harder than saying that everyone has their own truth.
Much harder. Woolf does not give us equal private truths in separate little containers. She gives us relations, in which some people's partial readings become diagnoses or exclusions. Some become acts of care. Some become social gossip. Some become invitations. And some arrive too late.
And all of them make claims on someone else.
Which is why I cannot know exactly cannot become an excuse for passivity. We may not own another person's experience. We are still responsible for the conditions of attention we create, whether we give somebody time, whether we repeat a damaging category, whether we hear care as knowledge or dismiss it as mere feeling, whether we recognize when our own explanation has started to close a life.
We are back to the voice note.
We are. An edited message can be intimate. It can be selected, addressed, replayed, overheard, and genuinely felt. Its mediation does not make it false. But a listener's recognition does not make the sender transparent either.
You can listen closely and still need to say, I may not have understood that.
More than that, you can listen closely and ask what in the room, the phone, the history between you, the available words, your hurry, your fear, or your authority is shaping what you think you have heard.
That is not a recipe for paralysis.
No. It is a reason to be slower before judgment, slower before diagnosis, slower before converting a person's visible detail, a difficult sentence, an awkward tone, a silence, or a remembered fact into the key that explains them.
Woolf's final scene gives us a smaller and more beautiful version of that difficulty. Peter asks, what is this terror? What is this ecstasy?
Then comes the outward recognition. It is Clarissa, he said. For there she was.
He sees Clarissa. He does not receive an authorized account of her interior life.
He receives a person appearing. That is not nothing. It is not everything. The line keeps the encounter alive because it refuses the false choice between transparency and indifference.
And it gives the novel one last re-beginning. Clarissa is not made new because Peter finally solves her. She becomes newly present because the encounter has not closed around its old account of her.
That is Woolf's fragile affirmative art. A person may reappear within the histories, grievances, desires, and misunderstandings that have already accumulated around them. The past does not vanish. It is carried into another moment of looking, and the moment has not yet decided everything.
So vitality here is not triumph over mortality. It is the persistence of appearance, the possibility that life may still ask something new of us after we thought we knew its shape.
Which is why the novel's social world matters so much. Flowers, bells, rooms, party glasses, doors, and other people are not ornaments around consciousness. They are the occasions through which a life becomes available again. Never completely, but genuinely.
It sounds almost slight. She is there. But the line does not say, now Peter understands Clarissa. It gives him an encounter, not a revelation.
And an encounter can be serious without being complete. Peter's terror and ecstasy remain questions. Clarissa's appearance does not translate them. It meets them from outside.
Which is a useful correction to the fantasy that the deepest relation is the one in which two people can explain each other perfectly.
Woolf is more demanding than that. She gives us people who matter because they exceed one another's account. Peter's long history with Clarissa does not make him her authorized reader. Clarissa's hosting does not make the room intelligible. Retzia's love does not make Septimus transparent. Bradshaw's expertise does not make his category adequate.
The novel keeps relation alive by withholding the final sentence.
And that withholding is not emptiness. It is what allows another person to remain capable of surprise, refusal, resistance, and address. If I have finished your meaning, I no longer need to listen when you change.
Clarissa's party does something similar. It brings people into view. It cannot make them fully known. Its offering is real, but it is made under conditions of class, labor, memory, invitation, performance, and unequal ease.
The novel asks for a difficult generosity. Interpret because people make claims on you. Do not turn interpretation into ownership. Care because another person's life matters. Do not make care a certificate of mastery. Use knowledge where knowledge can help. Do not forget that knowledge arrives with authority, and authority can close as well as open.
A demanding book about the limits of being helpful.
A demanding book about the limits of being right.
The kettle has stopped clicking.
The voice note continues.
Then what does careful attention look like?
Perhaps it begins there, not with the confidence that we have found the correct explanation, but with the willingness to notice when our explanation is becoming more powerful than the life it claims to describe.
I am Bear. This is Critical Animal. If I got under your skin, good. Subscribe and bring me to your next dinner party. See you next time.